Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that the University of Maine recognizes that it is located on Marsh Island in the homeland of the Penobscot Nation, where issues of water and territorial rights and encroachment upon sacred sites are ongoing. Penobscot homeland is connected to the other Wabanaki tribal nations, the Passamaquoddy, the Maliseet, the Micmac, through kinship, alliances, and diplomacy. The university also recognizes that the Penobscot Nation and the other Wabanaki tribal nations are distinct, sovereign, legal, and political entities with their own powers, self-governance, and self-determination. Hi, everyone. I want to welcome you to this event and offer just a few opening remarks before I turn it over to Holly Adams, who's going to formally introduce Paige. For those of you who do not know me, I am Brian Jansen. I am the Humanities Specialist for the Clement and Linda McGillicuddy Humanities Center here at the University of Maine. If you are not aware of the existence of the McGillicuddy Humanities Center, our mandate as a center is to support excellence in teaching, research, and public engagement in the humanities to deepen understanding of the human condition. Central to our work is the belief that the study of the humanities and the humanistically driven social sciences inspire compassion, empathy, and critical thinking skills, and the emotional and intellectual agility needed to navigate an increasingly interconnected and complex global landscape. Among the programs that we are most proud of at the McGillicuddy Humanities Center is our Undergraduate Fellowship Program. Each year, through a competitive application process, we award up to 8 UMaine undergraduate students $8,000 to spend a year pursuing an independent research project under the supervision of a UMaine faculty member. The logic of this program is that given time, financial resources, and space, these promising students are capable of producing truly excellent work in their field, work which might not otherwise have been possible. In addition to forming a cohort who act as advocates for and representatives of the humanities on campus, each fellow concludes their term as an undergraduate fellow by presenting a public talk about their research. In addition to today's talk and a reading by Paige, we'll conclude the semester next Monday with a talk by Ben Allen on tics and Tourette's in the academic environment, and that will be next Monday at 2 p.m. in the Writing Center in Neville Hall, and I hope you will join us for that. To learn more about the MHC or our events, come have a chat with me or go to our website. And with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Holly Adams to introduce Paige McHatten. Holly is Assistant Professor of English here at UMaine.
Thank you, Brian. It is my sincerest pleasure to get to introduce Paige McHatten today. I first came to know Paige as her academic advisor, watching her add a double major in journalism to her English degree and a concentration in creative writing. She would tell me about being a member of the Women's Club soccer team, an editor for her campus, for which she is now the editor-in-chief, and a writing center tutor. I think she also had a part-time job at this time. And I remember thinking, she's too busy. She's doing too much. But then her first semester's grades were posted. Okay, straight A's. And I thought, okay, so she's a good student. But she can't be a good creative writer too, right? That'd be impossible. I then had Paige as a student in a 300-level fiction writing class in the fall semester of 2021. From the moment Paige submitted her first writing assignment, I knew I was in the presence of a special and singular talent. I was, in short, blown away. Okay, so she's a stellar fiction writer, I thought. During this class, she asked if I would mind giving her feedback on a poetry manuscript she was intending to submit for publication. I said, sure, no problem, thinking there's no chance she could be a good poet too. She must have some weakness, right? No. Paige's poetry manuscript was brilliant. She submitted her first poetry manuscript, World Peace and Cowboys, to Bottle Cap Press, and sent me an email about 24 hours later to tell me they had accepted it for publication. I wasn't surprised. It was during the same semester that Paige volunteered to be the fiction editor of The Open Field, UMaine's undergraduate literary magazine. and these opportunities have fallen into her lap. It's that she seeks them out and then works hard to succeed at them. She puts herself out there. She takes chances. She volunteers. It was a no-brainer to suggest to Paige that she apply for a McGillicuddy Humanities Fellowship so she could continue working on the collection of short stories she had started in our writing fiction class. I'm gonna maybe embarrass Paige a bit by reading the first sentence of her first assignment that she submitted to me for this class. I didn't mind waking up early. There was something peaceful about being awake when everyone else was asleep. Maybe it was the fresh dewdrops on the grass, like tiny pearls, or the serpent fog that drifted towards my windshield. That 4 a.m. silence on my drive to work was a damn good time to reflect. I quote this because even though Paige is a few semesters out from this class and has definitely grown as a writer, I believe this assignment, her first one for me, still showcases some of Paige's greatest strengths as a writer. Her ability to craft a compelling narrative voice, her talents in imagery and figurative language, and her fearlessness with her prose, her willingness to surprise us with an unexpected damn from time to time. Paige's writing always strikes a balance between the beautiful and the gritty, the glorious and the obscene, the heartfelt and the downright hilarious. Reminiscent of some of the best fiction writers working today, writers like Atessa Moshbe and Lauren Groff, Mona Awad and Miriam Taves. About halfway through Paige's tenure as a McGillicuddy Fellow, she decided she didn't want to limit herself to fiction. She wanted to write poems too. And not only would she write them, she told me, she would get them published. And not only would she get them published, she told me, but she would get them published by the date of her McGillicuddy presentation and have them available for sale for people to then buy when they attended her McGillicuddy presentation. I think this was about December. I was skeptical. But I said, okay, sounds good. And in typical Paige fashion, her stunning second poetry chapbook, Goodness, was published, again by Bottle Cat Press, and it's available for purchase today here at the back of the room. It is likely no surprise that this poetry is also award-winning. This year, her Sistina, Murder on the Girlhood Express, which is maybe the best title I've ever heard, was recently awarded first place in the Grenfell Prize for Poetry in the Traditional Form category. And her prize, Genesis, was recently selected as third prize winner in the Plunkett Poetry Contest hosted by UMaine Augusta. I just want to mention that's open to all UMaine system students. It's a pretty big deal. I had Paige send me a bio in advance of today, just to make sure I didn't miss any of her many, many accomplishments. And in that bio, she writes, quote, in her free time, she thinks about what to do next. A, I wonder what free time, but B, I can't wait to see what she does next. Paige is in her third year. She still has another year here at UMaine, but she has already accomplished so much and has so much to be proud of. Please join me in welcoming Paige McHatten.
I'd like to begin this presentation by thanking you all for joining me this evening, to the McGillicuddy's Humanities Center for granting me this opportunity, Dr. Beth Wyman, Dr. Brian Jansen, and Dr. Holly Adams. Thank you for your dedication in giving students the encouragement to tackle big ideas and duly the discipline to see them through. This project unraveled itself in studying literature, creative writing, and intersectional feminism throughout my time at the University of Maine. From the beginning of my education here, I was drawn to literary and critical analysis, how studying each led me to develop my own voice. During my first year, I was taken out of my comfort zone while taking English 205, Introduction to Creative Writing with Tori Hood. I was used to writing essays. I would even say I was comfortable and eager to do so, in between online math exams and astronomy labs, but Tori's class pushed me to tap into storytelling, something I did often as a kid, hammering at the keys of my desktop computer, starting countless Microsoft Word documents that hardly ever made it to the printer. The ones that did pass through various stages of my exercising a disorganized perfectionism. I remember being proud of the ones that did, though. So proud that I exercised my networking skills, stapling stories together and distributing them like a little newsboy. I remember giving one story about a candy factory to my second grade teacher and being really confused when she gave it back to me after reading it. My passion for writing stories slowly extinguished by the time I was in middle school. At the time, I didn't have any concept of what was preventing me from engaging in something that brought me a lot of joy and satisfaction. The extent of what I wrote as a teenager outside of academic discourse was within the close confines of a diary, one that was, when not in use, stuffed away in concealed corners of my bedroom. It didn't have a voice-activated lock or anything fancy like that, but perhaps because there is such thing as a voice-activated locked diary, I was led to believe that what I felt and observed should be hidden. Naomi Wolf, who I'll reference later, once referred to women and girls as a, quote, quietly mad population, one ostracized for its so-called vapidness, its tendency to gossip, its widely agreed upon, yet virtually unspoken survival instincts, ones that are enacted internally for the sake of the external, what is visible to others. In revisiting my diary entries from middle and high school while completing this project, a practice one of my MHC fellowship predecessors, Sherilyn Robbins, inspired me to try, I found a lot of examples of mine being quietly mad. From June 29th, 2018. I like doing pageants, but I feel like I have to put myself in a whole different body in order to be accepted. Tonight I drove home from my boyfriend's house. I was scared the whole time and felt as if I had no control over the vehicle. I am trying to better myself, but right when I think I am successful in charting my sleep and so on, I have nights like this. I wish I could talk to someone who knows exactly what to say, but I don't know who that person is. In reading this entry and countless others 5 years later, I am able to recognize what held me back from exploring my voice as both a writer and a young person. Language like accepted, control, successful, point towards a lack of confidence and an extreme, sometimes maligned consciousness of how I was being perceived. The thing that stands out most to me about these entries is how ambivalent and unquestioning I was towards this scrutiny, or perhaps more so, how padded this scrutiny was within the confines of hedging language. For example, in declaring that I needed to, quote, put myself in a whole different body in order to be accepted, I was inclined to preface this by saying, I like doing pageants, but after decoding this entry, I can't pinpoint what exactly I liked about competing in pageants, apart from the fact that it gave me some sort of validation. Oscar Wilde once said, quote, women are meant to be loved, not to be understood. Although I think this sentiment was meant to be taken with one's tongue in their cheek, I think Wilde highlights a tension familiar to women and girls alike. In these records I've kept, I can observe how I've wrestled with both the desire to be loved and the desire to be understood, and furthermore, how these desires sometimes contradict each other. It wasn't until I was enrolled in English 271, the active interpretation, with Professor Steve Evans, that I began to gain a more acute awareness of this phenomenon. As Michel Foucault says in Eye of Power, quote, there is no need for arms, physical violence, material constraints, just a gaze, an inspecting gaze, a gaze that each individual under its weight will end by internalizing to the point that they are their own overseer, each individual thus exercising surveillance over and against themselves. While I do have the minds of Foucault and Saussure and Derrida and Jacobson and Freud to thank for this growing awareness of how the gaze informs our actions and discourse, the theorists I found myself gravitating towards most were the likes of Virginia Woolf, Hannah Arendt, Susan Sontag, Judith Butler and Adrienne Rich. Perhaps you can all recognize why. Each of these women, for lack of better terms, blew my mind in the way they articulated something that was, to me, previously inarticulable, that my comfort in using language is informed by my experience and identity. My eyes opened to the ways in which my expression had been limited by patriarchal and heteronormative motivations. Is it merely an inspecting gaze that led me to only share my thoughts in close confines, or something a bit more sinister? Perhaps this quote from Margaret Atwood's The Robber Bride is a more apt example of this experience, as compared to the previous quote by Foucault. Male fantasies, male fantasies. Is everything run by male fantasies? Up on a pedestal or down on your knees, it's all a male fantasy, that you're strong enough to take what they dish out, or else too weak to do anything about it. Even pretending you aren't catering to male fantasies is a male fantasy. Pretending you're unseen, pretending you have a life of your own, that you can wash your feet and comb your hair, unconscious of the ever-present watcher, peering through the keyhole of your own head, if nowhere else. You are a woman with a man inside watching a woman. You are your own voyeur. In combination with taking English 307, writing fiction with Dr. Holly Adams, I began to sit for hours in front of my computer as I did in my childhood, writing and rewriting, finding satisfaction in formulating exactly what I wanted to say, feeling empowered by the literature I was interacting with. I began to write fiction feverishly, with reckless abandon, inspired by contemporary writers like Otessa Moshfegh and Emma Klein. At some point in the course, Holly noted how much of my fiction, and later poetry, revolved around female friendships, particularly their nuances. She encouraged me to write a proposal for the McGillicuddy Humanities Center Undergraduate Fellowship, presenting a project that revolves around the intricacies, complexities, and contradictions that lie within the representation of women, producing a volume of creative work that both supports this research and challenges it. With Holly's guidance and endless book recommendations, this project sort of just made itself in studying scholarship in contemporary creative media. In fact, the title of this presentation was partly inspired by any work of literature, but rather a cartoon by Alison Bechdel and Liz Wallace that inspired the infamous Bechdel test. In the comic, the two women walk by a movie theater, and their conversation goes as follows. I only go to a movie if it satisfies 3 basic requirements. 1, it has to have at least 2 women in it who talk to each other about 3, something besides man. Pretty strict, but a good idea. No kidding. Last movie I was able to see was Alien. The 2 women in it talk about the monster. The Bechdel test has grown to be somewhat of a cultural buzzword. This could be seen as a good thing. It might indicate a greater awareness of the malalignment of female representation, especially in the film industry, but also beyond. This was part of the reason why I chose The Rule as the title for this project. I adhered to the test in writing the collection of short stories for the project, using it as a sort of framework to represent the nuanced interaction between women. On the other hand, though, I think the Bechdel test is an example of how metrics in the discourse around representation in women can miss the mark. Devout followers of the Bechdel test and its counterparts, I think, lack the sort of critical framework to recognize that it's not necessarily what women do and say that seems worth considering in a conversation about how the representation of women in the media has fallen short. Rather, it's the fact that we have needed to create these units of measure in the first place. Is there any rule that can work towards creating the perfect representation of women, one that isn't situated within the male gaze, but rather a comprehensive female gaze? In working on this project, I expected that the more I read, the more rules I would find, the more I would be able to articulate the feminine experience. This was not the case. As Margaret Atwood said in an interview with the Paris Review, quote, "There is no single, simple, static women's point of view. In attempting to write poetry and fiction that only tries to encapsulate the feminine experience, I think I simply wrote bad poetry and bad fiction. Rather than trying to write the end-all, be-all work that works to capture woman and girlhood, I decided to trace themes that were consistent throughout the works I've read. The first of these is obedience. The most defining work of literature revolving around women and obedience is, I think, the story of Adam and Eve. This narrative has inspired adaptation after adaptation, obvious ones like East of Eden and Paradise Lost, but also more subversive examples like Sylvia Plath's Dialogue en Route. In a contemporary lens, works like Naomi Wolf's The Beauty Myth tackle the shame that accompanies female deviance and resistance. Wolf writes, quote, "A culture fixated on female thinness is not an obsession about female beauty, but an obsession about female obedience. A quietly mad population is a tractable one." In the same sense that our culture is fixated on female thinness, it is also fixated on the comprehensive female image. This brings me to the second theme I've observed in my research: voyeurism. Defined as the pleasure one receives from looking at another, voyeurism is ever present in a conversation about how women are represented in media, especially film. Similar to the Bechdel test, Laura Mulvey's theory of the male gaze has become a cultural fixation, ever present in a contemporary arts and culture conversation. 21-year-old singer-songwriter Billie Eilish released a song called Male Fantasy, which I can't help but call back to the aforementioned quote by Atwood, in which the opening lines are, "Home alone, trying not to eat, distract myself with pornography. I hate the way she looks at me. I can't stand the dialogue. She would never be that satisfied. It's a male fantasy. I'm going back to therapy." Although citing an example from a Gen Z pop artist might be questionable for an academic presentation, I think Eilish demonstrates the male gaze in action. If we're treating this as a poem, the speaker here is questioning the image of woman she is presented with, while admitting that she's perhaps participating in the cycle, avoiding eating, consuming pornography, suggesting that women and girls make decisions based on how appealing it would make them appear to men, even if they're alone while making them. Originally appearing in the 1975 book, Visual Pleasure and Narrative Cinema, Laura Mulvey claims that women are described as image, whereas men are the bearer of the look. In studying cinema this semester, I applied these conceptions I had of the male gaze, ones that I gathered intertextually from other academia, but also from interacting with pop culture, to some of what we watched, including Alfred Hitchcock's Rear Window. After watching the film, I went down a rabbit hole of the Hitchcock cinematic universe and reading Kate Zambrino's Green Girl, whose protagonist Vanity Fair referred to as both infuriating and seducing, which indicates a job well done to me. I took note of the following quote by Hitchcock that she includes in the opening of a chapter, quote, "Blondes make the best victims. They're like the virgin snow that shows up the bloody footprints." Not only is there an indication of a visual pleasure in observing woman as subordinate, this quote by Hitchcock also recalls the pleasure found in narrowing the male gaze to a specific kind of woman, the one that is, to the bearers of that image, worth representing. The last theme, then, is power. More than anything, this project confronted me with ample examples of how women artists have fought for their 2 cents, how they have rejected and/or reclaimed centuries' worth of heteronormative, misogynistic representations of women. In Monique Batigue's The Straight Mind and other essays, she writes of, quote, "the power of discourses to do violence to people, a violence which is material and physical, although produced by abstract and scientific discourses, as well as the discourses of the mass media." Observed in the 2 prior themes, discourse within academia as well as creative media has the power to be oppressive. As Angela Carter calls attention to in her introduction to The Bloody Chamber, classic narratives that have maintained cultural relevance, fairy tales, folklore, even religious texts, are, quote, "extraordinary lies designed to make people unfree." In doing this research, I recognized that any time women artists work to debunk these lies, it's worth celebrating, but also worth honoring. As Clarice Lispector writes in The Hour of the Star, quote, "What I am writing is something more than mere invention. It is my duty to relate everything about this girl among thousands of others like her. It is my duty, however unrewarding, to confront her with her own existence." Not only is the task of rewriting representation unrewarding, it is also hardly ever neat or satisfying. I think we will always, as women working to redefine an old lie, be yearning for something more. As Simone de Beauvoir writes, "I am awfully greedy. I want everything from life. I want to be a woman and to be a man, to have many friends and to have loneliness, to work much and write good books, to travel and enjoy myself, to be selfish and to be unselfish. You see, it is difficult to get all which I want, and then when I do not succeed, I get mad with anger." Although Beauvoir articulates a sort of ambivalence implicit in being a woman artist, I think she also recalls the sort of intricacies, complexities, and contradictions I claimed I would reveal by the end of this research. At this point, you probably all would hope I'd explain how this project concluded itself to prove that I made any conclusions. In full transparency, I don't think this project will ever truly be finished. The more I read and write, the more possibilities I find to articulate the feminine experience, and thus the more complicated the scope of this work grows to be. Here's what I do know, though. Over the past 8 or so months, with the generous and sometimes imposter syndrome-inducing support of the McGillicuddy Humanities Center, I've had the opportunity to carve out a room of my own, making a space in my life to dedicate time to learning more about the representation of women and the efforts taken by women artists to take back the narrative in the style they deem fit. In January, I submitted my second chapbook manuscript titled Goodness to Bottle Cap Press, containing a number of poems that I've written during the past 2 semesters. These poems attempt to make reference to notable poets of the past, while also advancing the conversation they began. Reaper, which I'll be reading shortly, draws influence from male writers like T.S. Eliot and Marcel Proust, but places them in proximity to the voices of women artists like Virginia Woolf and Emily Dickinson. The process of writing this poem was empowering in the sense that I was able to draw influence from multiple areas, but manipulate them and embed them into my own narrative. My poem, Genesis, responds directly to, perhaps unsurprisingly, the book of Genesis and works to filter this narrative into a contemporary feminist lens. This collection of poems was published by Bottle Cap Press and will be available for purchase following this presentation. So I'm going to move into my reading now, but I'm going to grab a drink of water because I need one desperately. Maybe I can tell a joke with that. The first poem I'll be sharing was written for an assignment in English 308, writing poetry, and I see some of my classmates here today, so it's great to see you all. The prompt was to write in the style of or in conversation with Adrienne Rich, whose essay, Compulsory Heterosexuality and Lesbian Existence, was one of the works I read in completing this project. So this one is called Someone is Writing a Poem, and it begins with this quote from Rich. In a political culture of managed spectacles and passive spectators, poetry appears as a rift, a peculiar lapse in the prevailing mode. Inside the door, someone sits with her hands stacked on top of one another. Outside the door, no one waits to live through something. They hold 2 grocery bags in one arm to save themselves the trip. Back through the door, someone is thinking. She trips voluntarily with shoelaces tied. She learns the world through her bunny ears, white clouds billowing in and out of her temples. She wants to create something so carefully measured, so reckless and abandoned, the world caves in on itself. She dreams of triggering its genesis, silky hooded, glittering, uncoiling length, cooking up a new atom bomb, one named Baby Girl, a reminder that pretty things, pretty words, pretty girls were made to decorate a mindless fallout, to convince us there might be otherwise, maybe to convince us not to make it. The last ingredient is lead. Inside the door, she waits for the water to get warm. The curtains are drawn. She sits and waits while her self-contained spectacle detonates. All she sees are her moving hands. Oh, how they stir. This next poem was also written in English 308 for a surrealism assignment in which I tried to adopt the style in telling a first-person narrative about an experience I had in a convenience store. This one's called In My Dream Come True. I'm not too proud because my bicycle is rusty and my costume is wrinkled. A man in the convenience store tells me I'm the happiest person he's ever seen. And here's the part that scares him away. My eyes, I always worried one was bigger than the other, turn into tiny fish bowls and plop into my hands. This next poem was recently awarded the 2023 Grenfell Prize for Poetry in the traditional form category. It's called Murder on the Girlhood Express. When the story began, I was a dream in the shape of a thought, bending like an origami railroad, childlike, and I followed. A dream in the shape of a thought. New seasons, new sensations. I was childlike and I followed. The wind, the years, the gut I grew into. New seasons, new sensations. I was seasoned for the thick of it. The wind, the years, the gut I grew into. A girl who loved in flat pillows, seasoned for the thick of it. I was asleep to dream sequence, a girl who loved in flat pillows to shape some delusion. This next one is one that I referenced earlier. It's called Reaper, and it's written in conversation with the poets who I'm reaping from, and it works to unpack the nuances of girlhood. Time is a stack of photographs in the bottom of a drawer, thumbing through years, passing days. I knew everything once, then I started growing in spurts like violence. I am all of my years on top of one another. I dance, I speak, I hold my breath in shadows where young girls and flowers make ring with their hands, reciting great poetry. Something about me looks different. Something about me is different. From this morning to now, I got different. I can see it in my eyes. All I see are kitchen tables. When all that is left to do is admire the refrigerator, will I eat any peaches, and will this vine hold? I tug and cannot tell. I was a child once, spoke in fragments. Forever is composed of nows. The past is the poet down the hallway. When I squint, she extends her hand. It's always mine to grab. This next poem is dedicated to one of my favorite writers, Joan Didion. Tabula rasa. I know things before I meet them. I have done all of this before. See my visions, I tell you. Birds suspended, fixed by the wind. Did you know my memory is a black hole? It just sucks and sucks. I open my mouth for two reasons. To hear myself and to tap into inanimate objects. An eye is only a circle, a feeling, and I've met them all. I hold a dozen eggs in my arms, close to my heart, before I let them go. I know I go in one ear and out the other. This next poem references the title of one of my favorite Elliott Smith songs, but also weaves in the influence of Emily Dickinson and W.C. Bryant. It appears in my chapbook Goodness. It's titled Miss Misery. When a formal feeling comes, I'm reminded of bones, planks of a home swaying in the wind, harbored doubtfully. This splintered skeleton shells beneath your feet. How does one touch the universal heart? How do I build a temple? There are not any trees. This next poem was recently selected as third prize winner in the Plunkett Poetry Contest hosted by UMaine Augusta, and it also appears in my chapter of goodness, titled Genesis. It begins with the following quote. A river flows out of Eden to water the garden, and from there it divides and becomes 4 branches. Should I be good, and what form does fullness take? In the beginning, this heart was a void. It whistled like steam, like a lacking of the days. When the earth became flowered with creeping things, God saw its goodness. In everything there is a face. In something there is makeshift. I follow rivers, clutching my rib cage, bone of bones, stint, flesh of fleshes. Have you known shame next to another? Were we made in likeness? I see you, but you gaze in contradiction. You patch your shame with fig leaves. In becoming, water swelled for moons, full and new. I saw the sky and knew I was made in image, not creation. And this is the last poem I'll be sharing. It's the titular poem of my collection, a short and sweet one about my journey with self-love and self-discovery, titled Goodness. The winter of our discontent, dreams decoded in coffee drips. Let's give the pot a stir. Takes a lot of trouble to live, but have you ever danced? This concludes the poetry selection of this reading. As I previously mentioned, each of the short stories I wrote for this project attempt to follow Alison Bechdel's The Rule, placing female characters in proximity to each other, in interest of one another and themselves, not for the sake or prestige of their relationships with men. Of particular interest to me in writing these stories were offering what I consider to be honest representations of female friendships and relationships. One of the biggest intentions I set in doing this was not necessarily painting my characters in a particularly likable or flattering light, although I would love to write a story that follows an idyllic relationship between 2 women, a Chloe and Olivia situation, to call it back to Virginia Woolf. I think it would be missing the point of the kind of work I'm trying to do, denying women of their right to disrupt any space. In an interview with Otessa Moshfegh, promoting her short story collection, Homesick for Another World, the author says, I love my characters, but I don't like them. I don't love them like family. I love them like spirits that haunt me. They're just there, and I have to accept them. More than attempting to create a reverse hyperbole of woman as image, I've worked to portray women and girls in a way that deems them complex, and messy, and frustrating, for really no reason other than because I can. The short story I've chosen to read this evening attempts to do just that. Titled Another Secret Third Thing. She is disciplined in her habits, meticulous in appearance, and another secret third thing. She doesn't like to keep any books open. That's how dust collects. Her TV remote falls between the wall and her bed frame. She takes the bus and stands up straight, holding on to a railing. She doesn't like to sit for too long. She likes to hover over people. She isn't particularly tall. She stopped growing at some point. It's hard to tell when exactly. One day she was small, and the next day she was big. That's how it goes, years and inches. Look how you've grown, they say. Only she does notice how sometimes women tend to get shorter with age, but she thinks it could have something to do with their posture. She braces shame with careful consideration. Sometimes she wishes she had rocks for eyes. When she looks at herself in the mirror, she can't help but think about ugly things, the dry ends of her bone blonde hair, her unmascaraed eyelashes, short and nearly transparent, the cellulite she thinks collects between her thighs the way milk curdles in a carton. She likes to play dress-up, put on pretty things, decorate herself in the mirror as if she, herself, is a doll. She obviously got rid of her dolls a long time ago, those childish things. She's a college student, and her playthings are more abstractions now, difficult to grasp. She wades through communal spaces. She goes to coffee houses and listens to people talk. She likes lattes that taste like candles, ones with vanilla or cinnamon. We don't do syrups here, a girl at the register of her least favorite shop says, the one closest to her apartment, the one she only goes to when she's running late, which is often. I can add sugar? She thinks of adding like breaking a promise. She thinks wanting something implies indulgence. And in the old days, that might have meant you were wealthy or even royalty, but now wanting more has implications. She thinks deprivation is probably the key to wholeness, to goodness, like how her mother wakes up at 5 but doesn't eat breakfast until 8, like how a cup of coffee can be an act of obedience. I'll have a flat white, she says in return. One time she asked where a homeless person made their sign. She and her roommate Lisa took the bus downtown on a Wednesday night under the guise of getting frozen yogurt, but really, they just wanted to go to a place where there were plenty of people to look at them. Mostly they wanted to make eye contact with men and think about it for the rest of the night, but they didn't see many men this time, mostly boys, and both of them got bored easily. She was finishing her frozen yogurt on the sidewalk. She got peanut butter with marshmallow topping and sprinkles, and Lisa got a new non-dairy flavor that she didn't finish before throwing away. Lisa doesn't like to eat in public, but she isn't ashamed about those things. Everybody eats, she thinks. She was scraping the sides of the cup, looking for a trash can when she saw him. He had an empty ravioli can full of change at his bare feet, and a cardboard sign that said, "Need money to feed my dog." The letters were in purple ink, and there was a Spider-Man sticker as its focal detail, placed on what was intended to be the center, but was stuck a bit off-kilter. There wasn't a dog anywhere near him, but she didn't think that that meant there wasn't one at all. "Hey," she said, throwing her yogurt in the garbage can. "Where's your dog?" She pointed at his sign, walked a bit closer to him and the brick wall he was sitting against. Lisa lurked in front of the frozen yogurt shop. "What makes you think I have a dog?" he said, looking around with enough exaggeration that she figured he was being funny with her. "Is there a dog around here?" She laughed. She thinks laughter is the one thing that brings together people in a mostly innocent way. It says so on your sign. She leaned against the wall, her shoulders puffed up, unafraid. "Where'd you make it?" She wondered if there were sorts of arts and crafts stations for that sort of thing, if homeless people borrowed each other's Sharpie markers. "I didn't make it," he said, rubbing his hands together and rattling the ravioli can between his feet. "I found it somewhere." She likes petty resourcefulness. One time, when Lisa left a pair of jeans in her room, she put them in her drawer and only wore them on nights that Lisa wasn't around. She still offers looks of pity when Lisa talks about them, how they fit her just right, how they just vanished. She wondered if that was the same sort of situation as with the homeless man's sign. She decided to put $1 in his ravioli can and gave him her Hollywood smile before grabbing Lisa by the arm, leading her down the street. Sometimes silence can be powerful, she thinks. "I bet I made that homeless guy's day," she said, walking down the street to the bus station, nearly choking on the same smile. Lisa laughed. "I doubt you made his day," Lisa said. "And he's not a homeless guy. He's a person experiencing homelessness." She hates that sort of thing, the criticism. Lisa doesn't try to be nice to anyone. Lisa just criticizes the people who don't try hard enough. And what's so bad about believing in good things? She came from a town that did a lot of spaghetti dinners to benefit things like terminal illnesses and middle school field trips to Washington, D.C. She would always go to the town circus because it was a fundraiser sort of thing for the Shriners Club, and their hospital operated on children with scoliosis. She would always ride the elephants and take a balloon animal home, whacking herself on the head with it to make her mother mad. Lisa is an environmental science turned philosophy major and a consistent French minor, so naturally, Lisa can be insufferable. The reason why she takes French classes is because of Lisa. It's really easy to pick up, Lisa said when they first moved in together. She knew all about Lisa's experience picking it up. First, Lisa texted French foreign exchange students on WhatsApp, sending pictures of her school outfit saying, "C'est bon?" And then Lisa moved on to Tumblr, where Lisa spoke en français to the other smudge mascara mademoiselles that read Beauvoir and listened to the Smiths and Elliott Smith and other music that made their fathers say, "What is this shit?" and smoked cigarettes out of their bedroom windows. Girls who claimed they did all of those things over chat platforms, who all claimed it in romance language. And then there were the porn accounts. Lisa talked to people on those a bit as well. "I learned all the swear words, and most everything in between," Lisa said. "I'm going to move to Paris after I graduate. I need to live through something romantic. They say when you love the world, it loves you back." She decides that being romantic isn't her style of immersion, so she signs up for Introduction to French and does okay at it. Lisa teaches her the swear words, the colloquialisms, in case she does decide to go to Paris or maybe Canada if she gets around to getting her passport renewed. But mostly she just listens to her professor, who she calls Professor Madame in her head because she can't pronounce her last name, and repeats her frothy, choked words carefully. Sometimes when she practices her French, she shuts herself in the bathroom so Lisa won't hear her and taunt her pronunciation. Her bedroom and Lisa's bedroom share a wall. She and Lisa get into arguments about things like wilting vegetables and letting men into the house without asking each other first. She and Lisa are 20 and both feel like people are pushing them from behind. She tries not to be jealous of Lisa physically, her shiny hair that doesn't break, her bunny slope nose, her small feet. She notices all of these things and holds them in opposition to herself, bundled up and close to her heart, the jealous spot. She would probably admit that it's not just the obvious things about Lisa that make her self-conscious, like how Lisa can roll her R's and how she never puts too much milk in the mac and cheese. She thinks Lisa is a very measured, good-headed girl. She thinks she probably should try to absorb some of her good-headedness, but when she tries to, it just makes her sad. "I just feel like these walls are made of styrofoam," she says over the phone to her mother. "I wish I had a cat to keep me company." She wants someone on her side. "What would possess you to get a cat? How do you know you're not allergic to them? We never had one at home," her mother says through the receiver. It was true, they had never had a cat. Her father was an allergy-ridden, irritable man who slept in the lazy boy recliner because of his acid reflux. She slept with her mother most nights because she could hear him snoring from her bedroom, which was closest to the living room. "That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard," she says. "I'm not allergic to cats. If anything, they would improve my quality of life. They would make it so I didn't have to call you all the time." "They? You're getting more than one?" "Jesus, Mom, I don't know if it's going to be a him or a her." She likes to be progressive in that way. And she actually knows a lot about cats, like how they use litter boxes because they're not apex predators. She knows that dogs shit out in the open and act like it doesn't stink, but cats historically cover their waste with dirt or sand, in other words, the ground beneath them. Cats intrinsically cover their tracks, that much she knows. It's like how at their apartment she and Lisa keep this spray called poopery in the guest bathroom. And it's like how if a cat's litter box isn't clean, they'll just start going everywhere. It's like that rumor around campus, the one about the girl that pooped in the shower at one of the fraternity houses, how the guys were like, "That girl can never come back here ever again, what the fuck?" And now that girl's weekends are like an ASPCA commercial, there's just nowhere for her to go. And that's like how there's so many stray cats. Once in French class though, Professor Madame said that when people are placed within earshot of each other, that's how rumors get started. At least that's how she translated it. And really, that's all besides the point. Her mother and Lisa, and most people she elects into her circle, don't understand her practicalities. Cats for adoption near me. Google Translate. Long-haired cats for adoption near me. Cute cats near me. Coffee near me. Purebred cats near me. Studio apartments near me. Studio apartments far away from me. Why do cats need litter boxes? Can cats be potty trained? Why do cats run away? How many stray cats are there in the world? She takes notes of the results she searches for. She plans her dreams according to what she calls her dream logic. It's like how Lisa says, when you love the world, it loves you back. She thinks if you want the world, it will want you. She wants things before she knows them materially. One of her therapists told her it was this thing called clairvoyance. She thinks it's difficult to talk about that kind of strength when other people can do something tangible, something not just in the brain, something like speaking another language fluently. But she has her gifts, and one of them is dreaming day and night. Her mother, on the other hand, seems to dream in direct opposition to her, which is why they disagree a lot of the time. There's some messes that girls tend to bring into their lives willingly, and to their mothers, that's something worth lecturing against. I just don't know if you know what you're getting into. Having a pet is like having a child, her mother says, breathing with exhaustion. It wouldn't be something I would do right now anyways, she says, in the spirit of her mother's sigh. I'll talk to you later, love you. And the last part comes out more as an ellipsis before she hits the end call button. Most of the time she talks to her mother, it is either in the morning or the evening. Calling her mother is sort of like doing laundry, loading or unloading. And it's kind of like laundry in the sense that she forgets to do it sometimes. After she hangs up, she cries for a few minutes she can't explain. And after the tears come and go, she turns frantic in deciding what to do next. She does what she calls the American lullaby. She does a couple sets of jumping jacks and takes a bong rip and a swig of NyQuil because she misplaced its cap. And after the tears and the lullaby, she gets lost in her dreams, all sorts of them, like the ones that involve her getting recruited for an underground militant group. One out of the 2010's dystopian book to blockbuster adaptation, really sexy. And the sweetest part about the dream is that she never really knows what she looks like, or if she's even herself at all. In these dreams, she has a self-contained omnipotence, not like looking in a mirror, but through a window. And the worst part by far about these dreams is that they're also nightmares. And in the nightmares, there's these three things. There's the horrors, choices to be made, and another secret third thing. Horrors like leading her comrades through this open field where they're all in shooting range of the people in power, all of which tend to be people older than her, and it all expands towards this tunnel. And during the horrors, there's these choices to be made, like, do we even know what's on the other side of this tunnel? It all occurs in dream logic. In lieu of what's not explained, she still makes choices. She still wants, but can't explain where the wanting comes from. There are points in these nightmare sequences that make her wonder if all of the screams she has ever heard in music and the movies and the streets are ethically sourced, if the ends really justify the means. Sometimes she notices that one of her comrades is bleeding out once they get to the tunnel's mouth. When that happens, she doesn't carry them like some sort of biblical figure. She looks at them longingly and leads the rest of the group on. To her, this is brave in itself. She wasn't taught any ceremonies. Sometimes the dream fades before she gets to the other side. She's reached it once or twice, though. In that version, she makes it, and it's all just a beach, nothing but ocean and sand to be seen for miles. In that version, she doesn't look behind her. She doesn't feel hungry. She goes towards the water where the other women are rinsing off the sourceless blood and filth. They stand in the push and pull of the water. Their eyelashes drip with it. She sits down in the sand until she wakes. She thinks the most pit-in-the-stomach-inducing thing about secrets are the consequences of them being revealed. But since this is all just between us, she wakes up from these dreams in one sharp exhale. In the seconds it takes her eyes to adjust to the darkness, she contemplates what she is looking at in quick, pulsing spurts, ones that mimic violence. But when her heartbeat regulates itself, as it always does, she gets her consciousness back. This is a blessing, because she can then think of ways to fall back asleep. Time moves so fast she can't control it, but she likes to relinquish control in her dreams. She thinks about donating all her clothes to a homeless shelter and jumping on a Greyhound bus or a budget airline flight to a place where no one knows her. She thinks of living in a lofted space overlooking the city center, or on an uppity-up floor of an uppity-up hotel like Eloise, one that has robes hanging from the closet and a bidet and a heated towel rack. She understands the appeal of living in a hotel, and she understands the appeal of wanting a pet turtle. You can't outlive either. Houses get put up for sale and dogs and cats run away. Turtles are forever, and so are historical hotels. Eloise was a clever girl that way. She thinks of these things, and they materialize in her head, sort of like how fireworks explode. In dreams, she is fluent in French, and science supports that could mean she is in real life. And in dreams, Lisa isn't allergic to cats, so they drink wine on balconies, watching cigarette smoke billow into the atmosphere. In dreams, there's a laundry service, complete with a chute. In dreams, she has clean things and makes them dirty. The rest she doesn't rationalize. She does call her mother, though. She'll always call her mother. The best thing about dreams, she thinks, is that they're hers. She conjures them up, placing herself in whatever bedroom, in whatever place, with whatever she wants, a neglected cup of coffee, add sugar, on her nightstand, a cat purring beside her pillow, close enough that their noses touch and tickle from the dust bunnies, beautiful in the way that one of her eyes well up with a tear, one she can't bring herself to explain. Thank you. In the fall, I will be taking English 407, Advanced Fiction Writing, with Professor Morgan Talty, where I'll work on my capstone project, a continued effort to produce short fiction that both celebrates women and girls, but complicates the image paved for both parties. Near the entrance, I have copies of both of my poetry chapbooks, World Peace and Cowboys and Goodness, for sale, as well as a QR code to Bottle Cap Press's website and shop. There are also complimentary refreshments, so please help yourself. Thank you all. I know Drew talked about doing a Q&A bit, but are there any questions, I guess? Sounds like a no. Let's just mix and mingle instead. I'll turn the music back on and it won't be awkward. Okay, thank you.